Hello everyone, this is Helios Raven. I tell you how I do it, even if you don't care. And we're about to wrap up our in-depth look at the forces of Space Marines in Battlefleet Gothic. Yeah, they didn't get really much when they came out in the Armada Handbook, but we're saving the best for last, which is the Ramilies class Star Fort. This is basically a giant space fortress. This thing is massive, it's very expensive, and it is armed to the teeth. It's available for Imperial and Chaos forces, subject to the rules below. A Ramilies can be deployed as an orbital defense or in appropriate scenarios such as planetary assaults, exterminatus, surprise attack, or hunter prey as replacements for a planet. In such scenarios, orbital defenses may be sited within 30 centimeters of a Ramilies class Star Fort. A Ramilies is bought from the fleet's points rather than defenses to represent its rarity and importance. Ramilies may not be used by prior Ramilies may be used by prior agreement in competitive games. It's unlikely to be ambushing you in the middle of a fleet engagement after all, but can prove to be a good surprise find for players in unparred scenarios. So basically, they're saying is you could use this in a scenario where there was defense fleets in use instead, and replace it with a planet rather than instead of the planet you'd have the Star Fort, and you'd had to purchase it for your fleet, so it counted as part of your fleet. So, in other words, they didn't give any limit to what you needed to have this thing in your army, but they said chances are you're probably not going to use this in an everyday match just because it's so rare for this thing to just show up in the middle of a space battle. But then again, that's all player discretion, but it could be used for Chaos or Imperial Navy and the Space Marines as it was introduced. And we're going to now talk about the special rules, and before I get to that, I just want to mention that there is a model available for this. It was made by Forge World. It's still available on their website, and it's pretty hefty price. I think it's the most expensive Gothic model that they sell, but it is a really pretty model. And let's get on with the special rules. The first one is quadrants. Now, the way this ship works is it's got a... let me put a diagram up here. It's got, as you can see, it's basically a... it's basically a octagon shaped ship with a cross or an X going through it, cutting it into 4 sections. These 4 sections are called quadrants, and the tips are your docking piers, and the center piece is the quadrant. And it has certain weapons for each quadrant. Basically, in our description, the weapons that we're going to talk about in the quadrants, that each quadrant has this. When determining damage, you do damages to a quadrant itself, and the quadrant that gets damaged is determined by which direction the enemy vessel is firing at it. Let's see. And basically, the quadrant that you hit, you trace a straight line from the stem of the firing ship to the center of the fort. Likewise, when ordnance hits, it will be resolved against the quadrant of the fort it moves in from. So that was how you determine that, because that doesn't come into effect later. Templates: Nova cannons and Armageddon guns can score a full-on D6 hits only against the quadrant most under the center hole of the marker when it hits. On damages and criticals, all damage and criticals only affect the quadrant they are inflicted against, unless specifically noted otherwise. Quadrants are crippled individually once they are reduced to 6 damage points. And so basically, on 6 damage points, they are counted as crippled. Once a quadrant hits are reduced to 0. Any further hits plow into the drifting wreckage and do no further damage. Treat the quadrant for the fort as an asteroid field from now on. Hit and run raids. The hit and run raids are likewise resolved only against the quadrant they are directed at, and will not affect other quadrants. The Ramilies cannot be boarded by ships. Whole regiments would be needed. The only vessel that may attempt to board a Ramilies is a Space Hulk, as only a Space Hulk has significant number of troops. In terms of damage control is also undertaken individually to all intents and purposes, the 4 quadrants function as individual sections placed back to back, and the fort itself is only destroyed when all 4 quadrants are reduced to 0 hit points, and you should then roll on the catastrophic damage table for the Ramilies. Individual quadrants have their own ordnance and will not run out on doubles as normal. Basilica weapons are considered to have an unlimited supply of torpedoes and never run out, which is really nice. Shields and blast markers. Each quadrant has its own shields. When blast markers are placed, put them in the contact with the appropriate edge of the fort's base. In the end phase, D6 blast markers are removed from the whole of the Ramilies force, not just 6 blast markers per quadrant. So that's the only time where quadrant doesn't affect it individually. This is where all 4 quadrants are affected, so you can't get away with rolling 4 D6s for getting rid of blast markers on your Ramilies, because you don't get that with anything. Now, docking. Friendly ships in contact with the Ramilies model can halt their movement just as if they were in a gravity well. If they wish to turn, they may use the Burn Retro special order without taking a command check to do so. If a ship is in contact with one of the 4 interquadrant docking ports, it can fully dock. While fully dock a ship, it gains an extra 4 dice when rolling for damage controlled during the battle, and can restock ordnance if it has run out by remaining in contact with the pier and successfully using the reload ordnance special rules for 2 consecutive turns, which is really nice. Being reloaded on the 3rd turn. Even while fully docked, the ship is still targeted and attacked separately to the fort, although it counts as being in close formation with the fort for mass turret fire, with the benefits and dangers that brings. For more details, we see page 158, which we'll talk about later. If at all. I think that's like some special rules that we'll talk about in another video. And in terms of special orders, unlike most defenses, the command control and communications of the Ramilies is superior to even that of a warship. To represent this, Ramilies can use the following combat orders. Reload ordnance, lock on, brace for impact. Ramilies are also typically manned by experienced personnel, so their leadership is rolled as for a capital ship. A Ramilies also has a single command check re-roll, which may be used when it attempts to roll special orders. Fleet commanders may be placed aboard the Ramilies, in which case their own leadership value is used by the fort, and the fort's re-roll is added to the commander's own re-rolls, so that it can be used throughout the fleet. And one other special rule that they have is called the split orders. The internal communications of the Ramilies means that its different quadrants can use different squadrons, can use different special orders. For the purposes of issuing special orders to the Ramilies, the owning player can effectively divide the quadrants up into squadrons and then issue special orders to each in a turn, which is really nice. So you can have one quadrant doing reload ordnance while other one does lock on, while another one does brace for impact. Say, for example, if later in the turn the player needs brace for impact, he could do so with a single quadrant only, leaving the rest free to reload or lock on against the next. Weapons mounted on the central basilica count as operating under special orders of all of the quadrants, so it's entirely possible for them to be locked on, reloading, and braced all at the same time. Brace for impact orders will have the firing power and ordnance strength of the basilica and weapons as normal, which is really neat, so it can be locked on and reloading ordnance at the same time, which is phenomenal, which makes this thing a outright beast in combat and really, really hard to kill. It's definitely worth its points. That is, it's actually 875 points, which is an own fleet in itself. But again, chances are, because of how powerful it is, you're probably never going to use it in a typical match, except for mentioned in these special scenarios that we talked about earlier. And I'm running out of time, so we're going to continue this in another video. Until next time, this is Helios Raven, signing off.